Welcome to the Countries for Kids podcast from Case of Adventure. I'm Karyn and I'm so excited that you're listening today. I'm going to be reading from A Clash of Swords in Scotland from our Scotland Adventure book. To find out more, go to caseofadventure.com. Inside the royal palace were ornate fireplaces and wood-panelled walls, proudly showcasing different coats of arms and ancient weapons. "Through here, please. No videos or photos allowed." The usher checked their passes and directed them into a slow-moving queue inside a warren of stone passageways that made you feel more and more confined as you entered the depths of the castle. The crown jewels were encased in a giant glass case and heavily guarded by castle guards. The display was lit up with fiber optic lighting, and multimedia, music and models told the story of the honours of Scotland. "The crown rests on a handcrafted cushion," the usher told them. "The honours date from the reign of King James IV. They are the oldest royal crown jewels in the British Isles. They were first used in the coronation of the infant Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1543. An exhibition in a room nearby showed how the medieval longbow and crossbow would have been used. The children learned about different types of arrowheads and how arrow wounds were treated. "You never pull an arrow out of a wound as it would tear." Libby shuddered at the thought. "What should you do instead?" asked Jake. "Maybe you dig it out," said Libby. "With a spade?" asked Jake in a silly mood again. "Well," the guide responded, "it was just about that gruesome. They didn't have painkillers like we do today, but the arrowhead had to be cut out with a knife." "Ew," said Libby. There were displays of many different kilts and regimental coats. "Listen to this," Wren read to the others from the sign on the display case. "Almost 300 years ago, the Jacobites from the Scottish Highlands were led by Bonnie Prince Charlie in a battle against the British to try and win independence for Scotland. After they lost the battle, the wearing of kilts and the playing of bagpipes were forbidden." "That must have been awful for them not to be able to do something that was so important to them," Mom commented. "Yes, the British wanted to squash Scottish culture completely," Dad replied. "But I don't think it worked. It's very much alive today." After visiting the Scottish War Memorial, which was to remember all soldiers killed in the First World War and since, they decided to walk down the hill and brave the crowds along the Royal Mile. The cobblestone street known as the Royal Mile stretched from Edinburgh Castle all the way down to Holyrood Palace. It was named the Royal Mile in the 1500s when the king travelled back and forth between the castle and the palace. There were narrow alleyways to explore which branched off from the historic street. The buildings were old, some stone and some brick, with interesting wooden and metal adornments and painted window frames. On Parliament Square, down at the end of the Royal Mile, was St. Giles Cathedral and a house where John Knox, the famous Scottish reformer, had once lived. Next to the High Court of Scotland, in parking space number 23, a plaque in the concrete displayed the following: "The above stone marks the approximate site of the burial of John Knox, the great Scottish reformer." "It seems kind of sad that John Knox was buried here and it's just a normal parking space now," said Mum. "Yes, it does," Dad responded, "but at least there's a plaque to remember him by." Further down the street stood a narrow 3-story house with big windows and white wooden window frames. "This was the house where John Knox lived for a while before he was killed," Dad told them. Further down the mile was the impressive Holyrood Palace, a red-brown stone building surrounded by large gardens and an iron fence. The rooms were elegantly furnished and exquisitely decorated. The large dining room was magnificent. "I don't think I'd be able to eat anything in here," said Wren. "I'd be so busy looking around." "I expect you'd get used to it if you ate here every day," Rome told her. "You may even get tired of it." "Never," Wren declared, "and I'm sure the food would be fabulous. Elegant bird roasts, dainty desserts." She sighed dreamily. Afterwards, the family was delighted to find an American restaurant called TGI Fridays on Castle Street. They stopped for an early lunch before making their way back to the guest house to pack for their overnight visit to Wemyss Castle. Shauna Sinclair had promised to keep their room for them while they were away, so they were able to leave most of their belongings behind and take just an overnight bag. Rome felt sure that Wemyss Castle would hold many mysteries, and he couldn't wait to discover what they were. Chapter 3: The Missing Piece. Wemyss Castle, Fife, Scotland. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the family in their hired van had left the tall, majestic buildings of Edinburgh behind and were travelling along a highway which was lined with large trees and lush green vegetation. The journey to Wemyss Castle in Fife was an hour long. Dad glanced at the children in the rearview mirror. In Britain, it's called a motorway or a highway. In the USA, it's a freeway or an interstate. I state that motors can drive high along this way into their towns, Jake quipped, mixing up the words. There are many things that are different here in the UK, Wren told the others. In my baking book it says that pancakes in the USA are called flapjacks here, and biscuits in the USA are like savoury scones here. Cookies there are biscuits here. That could be confusing, Rome agreed. I think I'll order pancakes and biscuits here and see what I get, Jake decided. Sounds like it could be anything. The weather was grey and cloudy, but the fields and winding roads were scenic and peaceful. Traffic decreased significantly as they left Edinburgh. So they drive on the left side of the road here, Rome commented. I heard that the reason people here drive on the left is because riders on horseback, long ago, wanted to keep their sword hand free to defend themselves against an enemy. They rode on the left and kept their right hands free for that purpose. They crossed over the Forth Road Bridge. This bridge is one of the world's most famous long-span suspension bridges, Dad told them. It has a span of about 1,000 meters between the two towers. Apparently it's so long that before modern techniques were invented, they used to permanently employ a team of painters. The painters were never finished, because when they finished repainting at one end of the bridge, they'd have to start again at the other. Isn't this the bridge that Felix Baumgartner jumped from with a parachute? Asked Mum. That's right, Dad replied. He's the man who jumped from space, said Rome. Dad grinned. That's right. I wondered if you'd remember. What do you know about it, Rome? Not much, replied Rome. Just that he jumped from very high up. It was quite an epic event. He's an Austrian pilot who went up into space in a capsule held up by a helium balloon. He jumped in order to experience free fall to the earth. His fall was more than 3 minutes long. It must have been really scary for him to jump from that high, said Libby. The others nodded their agreement. By and by they drove into the village of West Wemyss. Near the shore, set on the cliffs between the villages of East and West Wemyss, was Wemyss Castle. A castle is always best built on a hill, Dad told them. It helps the castle occupants to defend themselves and also to be safe from the elements. And they can see the enemies coming from far away, said Rome. That's right, said Dad. Wemyss Castle is high on the slopes above the coast. The view must be spectacular. They passed the tower house of the castle, which was in ruins. The castle itself had a rectangular main block and a round stair tower projecting from its front. Janet came to the gate to meet them. The gate guard waved them through, and Janet rushed up to the car with great excitement, opening the car door before the footman had a chance to act. She gave Mom a huge hug and then welcomed Dad and the family, all the while chatting to them in her melodious voice about how happy she was to see them. A tall, imposing figure filled the castle doorway, and Rome's first impression when he looked up at Iain Wemyss, future Earl, was that he looked like a man in charge. His every move was sure and determined, and he walked with long strides, purpose in each step. He held out a hand to Rome, smiling a broad smile, which made him considerably more approachable. I'm Iain. Welcome to Wemyss Castle. Rome, sir, thank you, replied Rome, holding out his hand to shake Iain's, a little unsure of how to respond to such a stately greeting. Libby bounced up next to her brother and grinned at Iain. Hello, pretty lady. Iain gave a flourishing bow and kissed Libby's outstretched hand. Libby giggled. Stop teasing her, Iain, Janet scolded her fiancé. Iain grinned shamelessly, greeted the rest of the family, and then led the way to the castle entrance, standing back to allow the ladies to pass through the doorway first. You don't sound as Scottish as some of the people we've met, said Dad to Iain. Iain spent all his years in school in England, Janet told him, so you'll find his accent more English than Scottish. My accent has grown milder as well after spending time studying and teaching in South Africa. Should we start with the tour? Iain asked as they entered the castle. Yes, responded the children, irrepressibly eager. Iain showed them through the magnificent rectangular block of the castle where the family lived. Their spectacular vaulted ceilings stretched out above them as they passed from room to room. Iain and Janet took them up the long, narrow spiral staircase enclosed in the round stair tower. On the second floor was a long passageway with paintings decorating the walls. Imposing ladies and gentlemen stared at them from the canvases. There were many rooms off the main passage. Janet showed them two with an interleading door where they'd be spending the night. There was a view of the castle gardens and the fountain. They went on up the narrow stone staircase and came out on the roof of the castle. We wanted to make it safer to be up here, commented Janet, so we had iron railings put in the places where the walls are lower. Slow down, you guys, Mom instructed Jake and Libby. The rail means it's a little dangerous up here. Yes, we'd rather you only use the stairs to go down than any other means, Iain joked, and I'm the only one allowed to abseil off the roof of the castle. Janet wagged her finger at him. You promised not to tease them, Iain grinned mischievously at her, and she gave him a peck on the cheek. Wren admired the obvious affection between the two. Iain pointed to the ruined tower house, which stood forlornly at the end of the garden, in strange contrast to the magnificence of the rest of the castle. I'm sure you'd love to explore that while you're here, Iain continued. Definitely, thank you, Rome replied. It looks like something out of a famous Fife book, said Wren. A place filled with mystery and intrigue. Yes, and what a stunning view, Mom sighed contentedly. How wonderful that we're staying overnight. Can we go down to the dungeons? Asked Rome. The dungeons were bricked up almost 100 years ago, I believe. I suppose we never felt the need to keep many prisoners, Iain chuckled. We do have cellars for storage purposes, though. Shall we take a look at those? He led the way down the steep spiral staircase through the courtyard to a small stone structure surrounded by trees. The entrance is rather obscured by the foliage, he said. Come through here. The children, who were not far behind, followed him down the steep steps and through a doorway with a heavy wooden door into a large, musty stone room. Metal kegs, wooden barrels, plastic drums, baskets, and a few sacks were scattered about. There was a shelf with wine bottles and other supplies neatly stored against a far wall. I can feel the history of this place, thought Rome, standing in the first cellar room. He pictured earls from centuries ago standing where he was, surveying their supplies for the winter or hiding from enemies in times of war. There are a few places connected to this first one. It's quite an extensive underground place, Iain told them. I used to love playing in them as a boy. The children looked around them excitedly. You're welcome to explore the cellars while you're here, if it's okay with your mom and dad. They're quite safe and my staff are in and out fetching supplies. Why don't we go and have tea? Janet suggested. I'm hungry, said Libby, taking Janet by the hand and smiling at her. You're always hungry, Jake joked with her. Libby grinned at him. I'm a growing girl. Me too, Tiffany added. You guys sound like Iain here, Janet remarked as they made their way back to the main part of the castle. He's always hungry. We have a first-class chef and a fine pastry chef, Iain told them. That's one of the perks of living in a castle. Wow, your own chef? Wren was surprised. That must be amazing. I bet you don't even have to do your own dishes, Rome remarked. At that, Iain burst into laughter and clapped Rome on the back. For sure, lad, that's one of the best perks of all. I'm guessing you do have to do the dishes at home. Yes, when he cooks, Libby told him. Rome likes to cook Italian food, but he always has to wash the dishes when he's done. It's not your favourite part, I'm guessing, Iain smiled at Rome. When I was growing up here, my father made me wash the dishes after dinner each evening, so I could learn responsibility and be more aware that there's always work to be done, even when you have servants. What else did you do here? Rome asked him. What was it like growing up in a castle? I was away in England a lot at school, but I have many wonderful memories of my time here. I loved to explore the cellars, play in the ruins, climb trees, build forts, that sort of thing. I spent lots of time exploring the rest of the castle grounds. There's no shortage of things to do here. The other thing I did almost every day as a boy was sword fighting. Perhaps later I can give you boys a lesson in that. That would be awesome, Rome replied. Yeah, Jake agreed. We can go over and explore the ruins of the Tower House at the same time, and you can see some of the castle grounds, Iain told them. The Tower House once had a tunnel which was connected to Wemyss Caves further along the coast. The tunnel collapsed years ago, but you can still see the entrance. Rome stopped to show Iain the scian dubh that Grandad had given him. Dad and Jake stopped as well, while Rome showed Iain the Bible verse inscription. Wren asked Janet how she felt about moving into a castle. You'll be like the lady of the manor in those old stories. Janet laughed. It is exciting, though rather different these days. I'll still be teaching, and Iain would like me to teach from here. I can't imagine what my students will think coming to a castle for their extra English or history lessons, but on the other hand, what better place for it? This place is crammed with history. I'll be involved in the running of the kitchens, hosting of events, in approving menus and planning dinners for dignitaries and clan members. I'll also oversee the running of the household, but there are staff for everything, so I won't need to be doing the actual work of cooking or cleaning. And how will things work when you have children? Mom asked her old friend. Will you be expected to have a nanny? It'll be my choice, Janet responded. There's definitely the option of a nanny, and it's sometimes expected of someone of Iain's standing, but we've talked about it, and I want our children to be with us as much as possible. I don't want to hand over responsibility for them to someone else. It's important to me to be as hands-on as possible with them. And we'll make sure they wash dishes too, she grinned at Rome, who, along with the men and Jake, had caught up with them. Rome grinned back, having heard the latter part of the conversation, then ran on ahead with Jake and Libby. When they reached the main entrance hall of the castle, Iain and Janet led them into an elegant dining room. There were intricately woven tapestries on the walls and gold finishes on the chairs and table. But all Rome took notice of was the magnificent spread on a large table off to the side. It was adorned with a charming tea set and laden with delicacies. There were scones, Scottish shortbread biscuits, tiny iced cakes, and a plate of pretty chocolates. There was a platter of cold meats, salami and sausage rolls, as well as a loaf of fresh bread. Janet helped them all to get seated and offered the children each a chocolate treat. Servers brought the platters around for them to help themselves from. Once everyone had full plates, Iain nodded to the butler, who beckoned to the servers. They all left the room, closing the door behind them. International Discovery Agents, this is your mission. Draw a plan of a castle as you would design it, including dungeons and towers. Find out if you can fly directly to Scotland from your airport. If not, what route would you travel? And cook a Scottish breakfast for your family. You can include things like baked beans, bacon, toast, hash browns, lots of delicious things. That's all for now. See you next time.